We often hear about European colonial empires as pioneers of exploration, trade, and civilization. But the truth is far more horrifying. These empires didn't just explore new lands. They conquered, enslaved, massacred, and plundered their way to global dominance. The brutal actions committed by these powers are some of the darkest moments in human history. From forced labor camps to mass executions, from artificial famines to the destruction of entire civilizations, the horrors inflicted by European empires still haunt the world today. And the worst part, many of these atrocities are rarely talked about. You might think you know about colonial history, but I promise you, some of these crimes will shock you. Each empire had its own way of exploiting, torturing, and dehumanizing people, and the scale of their cruelty is staggering. Some of the most horrifying acts happened not hundreds of years ago, but in the 20th century, right before the modern world we live in today. Stay with me as we expose the brutal crimes of every major European empire: Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. And trust me, the worst ones are coming later in the video, so don't go anywhere. 1. Spain, the Empire of Blood and Gold. Spain's colonial empire was the first global superpower. It dominated Latin America, parts of the Caribbean, and the Philippines for over 300 years. But Spain didn't just rule these regions, it bled them dry. Mass slavery and forced labor. The Spanish implemented the encomienda system, which forced indigenous people to work in horrific conditions. Gold and silver mines were filled with enslaved natives who were worked to death. The Potosi silver mines in Bolivia were a death sentence. Millions of natives died mining silver for the Spanish crown. Genocide of indigenous peoples. When Spain arrived in the Caribbean, the Taino population was almost completely wiped out within a few decades. Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro destroyed the Aztec and Inca empires through massacres, deceit, and disease. Spanish conquerors would burn indigenous leaders alive if they refused to convert to Christianity. Spain's brutality led to the deaths of over 50 million indigenous people in the Americas. 2. Portugal, the forgotten slave empire. Portugal doesn't often get the same attention as Britain or Spain, but make no mistake, its colonial crimes were just as horrifying. The transatlantic slave trade. Portugal was the first European nation to start large-scale African slavery. Over 5.8 million Africans were kidnapped and sent to Portuguese colonies, especially Brazil. Slave ships were floating tombs. 1/3 of the captives died before even reaching land. Colonial terror in Africa and Asia. In Angola and Mozambique, forced labor camps lasted until the 20th century. In Goa, India, the Portuguese carried out brutal forced conversions of Hindus and Muslims, often using torture. 3. Britain, the empire where the sun never set, on atrocities. Britain ruled over 1/4 of the world's population at its height. But this rule came at an unimaginable human cost. The Irish famine, 1845 to 1852. Ireland suffered a mass starvation while British authorities exported food out of the country. Over 1 million Irish people died, and another 2 million fled. The Indian famines, 1876 to 1943. British policies turned natural droughts into mass deaths. The Bengal famine of 1943 killed over 3 million people, while Britain continued exporting food from India. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister at the time, blamed Indians for breeding like rabbits instead of helping them. Massacres and concentration camps. Amritsar Massacre, 1919. British troops fired on unarmed civilians, killing hundreds. Boer War concentration camps. 1899 to 1902, Britain set up camps where over 27,000 women and children died of starvation and disease. Britain's empire was built on starvation, violence, and racial exploitation. 4. France, the bloody hand of colonialism. France controlled vast territories in Africa, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia. Their brutal reign lasted for centuries. The Haitian massacres. In Saint-Domingue, now Haiti, enslaved people were treated worse than animals. 1 in 3 African slaves in Haiti died within their first few years. When Haitians fought for their freedom in 1791, France responded with mass executions. Atrocities in Algeria, 1830 to 1962. Over 1 million Algerians were killed in their struggle for independence. France used rape, torture, and executions to keep control. 5. Belgium, the horror of the Congo Free State. Belgium, despite its small size, committed one of the most horrific colonial atrocities in history. King Leopold's genocide in Congo, 1885 to 1908. Under King Leopold II, Congo became his personal property. Africans were forced to collect rubber under threat of mutilation. If workers didn't meet quotas, their hands were cut off as punishment. The result? Over 10 million Congolese people died. Belgium's colonial rule was one of the deadliest in history. 6. The Netherlands, the forgotten colonial crimes. Though smaller than Britain or Spain, the Dutch ruled over Indonesia, Suriname, South Africa, and the Caribbean. Mass slavery and genocide. The Dutch ran some of the most brutal slave plantations in the Caribbean. In Indonesia, they slaughtered over 200,000 people in the Java War, 1825 to 1830. Indonesian War of Independence, 1945 to 1949. After World War II, Indonesia fought for freedom from the Dutch. The Dutch responded with executions, torture, and massacres. 7. Germany. Late but brutal. Germany was late to colonialism, but it made up for it with shocking cruelty. The Herero and Nama genocide, 1904 to 1908. In Namibia, German forces exterminated 80% of the Herero and Nama peoples. Survivors were sent to concentration camps, where they were worked to death. Brutality in East Africa. In Tanzania, German troops massacred thousands to crush revolts. Germany's short-lived colonial empire set the stage for its later crimes in World War II. European colonial empires built their wealth, power, and influence on the backs of millions who suffered unimaginable horrors. These weren't just isolated incidents or the actions of a few bad individuals. This brutality was systematic, deliberate, and justified under the guise of civilization. Entire populations were enslaved, starved, massacred, and stripped of their cultures, all so European empires could expand their dominance. Even today, the scars of colonialism remain. Many former colonies still struggle with poverty, political instability, and social divisions that were deliberately created by their colonial rulers. The wealth that made Europe rich was stolen from lands that continue to suffer the consequences. Yet, history books often sanitize these events, making colonization seem like a period of progress rather than oppression. But the truth is clear. Colonialism was built on blood, greed, and violence. It's time we stop glorifying these empires and start acknowledging the horrors they committed. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, which colonial empire do you think was the most brutal? Let's keep this conversation going. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.